Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Uncovered. I am Erik Sexton, which is actually God in Germans, the billion-dollar broker. I am here with Dan Doherty, the billion-dollar broker. Dan Doherty is a you're an executive chair at Colliers International, and you head up the Doherty Industrial Group. You've been in town for about 34 years doing brokerage, is that correct?
34 years doing brokerage, been in town 46 years.
46 years. Okay, so you've been a broker for 34 years. So just jumping right into it, I throw out the billion-dollar number because your team, you have a very prominent industrial brokerage team here with a couple very seasoned brokers, which I'm very curious later in this conversation to see how you are able to manage successful brokers, because a lot of times people spin off and do their own thing. But tell us how you got started here. Why'd you pick industrial brokerage? Where was your first brokerage house, and how'd you pick industrial?
So I'd like to say I picked anything, but it kind of picked me.
Okay.
So late in high school, I was a busboy at TGI Fridays on East Flamingo.
Okay.
And you have to have been in town quite a while to know that that was even there, because it's been leveled a long time ago. Went away to school at UNR, now they call it Nevada.
Okay.
And I would come back summers, Christmas, 3-day weekends, and pick up shifts. So I was on the payroll for 5 years. Graduated, came right back to Vegas. Then I was doing either barback, waiting tables, or busboy still, whatever shifts I could get. And Coldwell Banker Commercial at the time shared the parking lot. They would come over every Friday night and drink on the corporate tab before all that stuff got eliminated. And I got to know them just by serving them.
Okay.
And at the end of the summer, when I would normally be going back to school, I realized I can't be cleaning bottles, tables at 3 a.m. on Friday and Saturday night. This is no longer the glamorous life I thought it was, and I knew I had to do something else. Coincidentally, the manager at Coldwell Banker Commercial, which is now CBRE, said, "You need to come and interview." That was at the end of August in '89. And I did, and got hired, and the top producer at the time, a guy by the name of Perry Maselli, was up for a runner, which is where you basically company paid slave labor. So you work 65 hours a week, and I think I ended my first year just below $16,000 in salary. And he happened to do industrial, so I was doing industrial.
That's interesting. I remember Perry Maselli. He started a development company later, I think.
He's done a lot of stuff. He was very successful.
So that's interesting. So you just kind of fell into it because you were the proximity. It's kind of funny. That's the same way I started. I was in college and I met some brokers, and they were all driving fancy cars. And I was like, oh, what do these people do? And I ended up being a broker's assistant during college. Same thing, industrial broker. And now I'm pushing 20 years, which is crazy for me to say. So after you started then working with Perry, where did you go from going from there? How'd you end up at Colliers? Did you go to any other brokerages before that?
Did not.
Other
than CB.
Okay.
First 9 years. Then I went to Colliers 25 years ago, and I've been there ever since.
That means they're doing something good. So Colliers, as a note, Colliers International is one of the biggest commercial brokerages in the world. They've got offices literally everywhere on the planet. So we covered how you started. So you went to college, were working at a bar. So I talk about your team because there was a big article earlier last year that your team did $1 billion in revenue, and that's not in brokerage transactions. Now you have a big team. You've got 9 total people, I believe.
8 right now.
Eight right now. So I know 3 of actually 4 of them pretty well, but Jerry, Paul, and Chris, all seasoned guys. How do you delegate and manage with your partners on who does what in running a team? Because not everybody can be doing everything at the same time. Do you guys have specific roles that each person does, or how do you guys come up with a plan to divide and conquer?
So it used to be just catch as catch can.
Okay.
Whoever was available on a given assignment would work on it. It's tough to really hone skills doing it that way. So as a general rule, Jerry, who's my nephew, does our tenant rep.
Okay.
Paul does our land. Chris does the bulk of our landlord representation. And then sometimes I think we're still trying to figure out what I do.
Okay.
But I really try to focus on strategy, relationships, and business development, but I still do get pulled into transactions quite often.
You get sucked into doing podcasts on Friday mornings, which we appreciate you coming in. So, okay, so you guys kind of have just over time strategized on who kind of just figured it out as you go. Do you guys have regular meetings? So like my team, for example, which, a note, you were actually one of the guys who helped me structure my team, which I always appreciate. Do you guys, like my team has a call every Wednesday. We have group texts and group emails. We're in constant communication. Everybody's got access to all the deals that we have, and that's just so everybody knows what everybody's doing. Do you guys meet on a regular basis?
We do. We meet every week, but also we probably do 3 to 4 client Zoom or Teams call a week.
Okay.
And that's just updating on different projects we're working on. And by default, after every one of those, we usually sit for 20 to 45 minutes and just make sure everything's being handled and make sure we're staying on top of new goals, new pursuits, new ideas, but mostly cross-pollinating on information that you hear throughout the week, because that's really the biggest benefit of a large team. Not just doing more transactions, but hearing more information. And hearing more information could be at an SIOR trip that you just took. It could be in the local paper. It could be in a different type of periodical, or just a conversation on the phone. A little bit of information combined with somebody else's information and maybe someone like my experience over 34 years can actually lead to the right call at the right time and a deal.
So constantly being in communication, that little nugget of information could put something over the edge. Yeah, it's a really good point. That's like when our team, when we're talking, like Camila, who works with me, she'll call me and tell me about some building owner that she talked to, and I'm like, oh, I know that guy, and like try talking to him about this. And by comparing notes, you can really get on the same page, and you really do go a lot further on a team when you're working together than just trying to do things yourself. So yeah, I've really enjoyed having a team and being on a team versus just trying to do my own thing. So comparing notes and working together is a huge thing. So you personally, being in the business as long as you've been, how do you stay sharp and learning and staying on top of your game? I imagine you're just not going home at night and now, popping open a beer and sleeping in all the day. I imagine you're an early riser and work quite a few hours. So how do you stay at the top of your game this long into your career?
So as far as where to get the information, where to continue to learn, obviously the internet's a huge tool. I listen to other people's podcasts. NAIOP's a fantastic producer of information on a national, local, and international level. SIOR has fantastic content. Colliers produces a lot of content. It's amazing to me sometimes how much you can learn listening to an event that somebody puts on for new brokers, because we forget a lot of stuff as we age and as we grow in the business, and those kind of block and tackling maneuvers still work at any experienced person's level.
So just absorbing any information you can get. Yeah, the SIOR conferences, I just got back from one. SIOR is Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, for people who have not heard of that. It's very seasoned agents, and the notes, comparing notes from different markets and how they run their offices or teams is a huge benefit, because you hear that one thing and you're like, oh, I should try that, hence starting a podcast. Speaking about, you mentioned being a new agent, even when I started, there was the internet. There was one online listing service that was called Property Line here in town. I loved it. It was like $50 a month, and now we spend thousands on it. But new agents have so much technology to their what's the word I'm trying to think of? To their accessibility. They can access so much technology. Is there something you've seen that one of your newer agents has come on and been like, hey, why don't we try this? Or there's a tool, and you were just like, oh my God, I wish I would have had that 20, 30 years ago when I was in this business?
I mean, the most relevant today is artificial intelligence, where the smartest groups, from what I've seen, is inputting leases and then calling them back up when a certain event happens. Like we just had a tenant call up and say, my roof's bad, I need the landlord to replace it. So that used to be sorting through countless files to find that deal file, that physical deal file.
Paper.
And reading the lease and finding the section with regard to landlord responsibility, tenant responsibility. Now you can just put a few instructions into AI, tell them what you're looking for. They'll pull up that tenant's lease from that project and send you that provision related to landlord and tenant responsibility. So it saves an enormous amount of time. However, I will say for new agents, the technology boom, the internet, all of that can be an absolute rabbit hole. So what I used to do on the weekends, my wife now of 30 years, we would get in her car on a Saturday morning when we were dating, and we would drive around town and look at warehouses, and I would have a dictaphone, which you talk into, and it tapes your voice, of course. Some people don't know what that is. And any vacant building, any building where you had too many trucks there on a Saturday, almost anybody that was working on a Saturday in industrial real estate is usually pretty busy. Conversely, if somebody was moving out of a building, I would take down that information. That's what I would spend my week doing, is making all those calls from the information I got driving on 4.5 hours on a Saturday. And that all, for the most part, led to either great market knowledge or a deal. And now people can get so trapped in front of a computer screen that I've seen people 5, 6, sometimes 10 years in the business not know where a certain building is at. And at 164 million square feet, it's a lot harder than the 27 million square feet I started with. But rarely does anybody mention a building in town that I don't know about, seen, possibly even sold or leased 4 or 5 times. And that just comes with reps over time. But it also comes with still getting out. I do it once a month. Morgan on our team does it every single weekend. He gets out there and drives a sub-market and takes those same exact notes, because I think that's how you develop market knowledge, which is my whole concept of sales in commercial real estate.
You just said something that is the best piece of advice I have ever gotten. All the technology out there, Google Earth, drone video, you need to get in your car and drive the market. And as Las Vegas grows, our traffic gets worse. Early Saturday morning is the best time to get out. And you said, I love to hear that you say you do that. I still do that periodically, because if you're driving around early Saturday morning and you're in front of a 100,000 square foot warehouse and there is some expensive car parked out front, I guarantee you that is the decision maker. And they are usually pretty open to speaking to you. So if you're a new agent, that is a fantastic tip that you just mentioned, is get in the car, drive the market any day, but in the mornings on a Saturday is also a good time, because the decision maker is going to get into the office early in the morning because they want to get home to their family. So they're going to catch up and then get right back home. So yeah, physically driving around, you get, the thing I've noticed too with agents is we get so caught up with this technology of Instagram and Twitter and podcasts as we're doing this, ironically. If you got rid of all this stuff, I could still be a very successful broker driving around town with a cell phone and a notepad and just making physical phone calls, which I still find to be the most powerful tool. That's a really interesting point.
And that's one of the things I like most about industrial real estate is, even as institutional as the business has gotten, not just on the landlord side, but on the tenant side as well, better than half the time when you pull up to a building on a Saturday morning, you're going to speak to someone who has some authority, like you said, or sometimes even an owner. Mm-hmm. That hardly ever happens in retail with so much corporate franchise business. There's a real estate department, they have a national brokerage relationship, and you can talk to them all you want, and you're probably not going to get any business. I love the fact that you can walk in a warehouse, and you're right. Not only on a Saturday morning do they appreciate hustle, because they had to do it early in their career. Yeah. They appreciate someone willing to spend that time on a Saturday versus staying out all night on a Friday and sleeping in. And I think most entrepreneurs want to help entrepreneurs, especially young ones. I do. One of my many objectives is I love to help young people in the business succeed, just because I've gotten so many breaks in my career that led me to where I am now. I really think it's a passion, but it's also a duty to pass it on to those getting going in the business.
Yeah, that's that passive forward thing. Well, heck, you did it with me before I had a team. I asked you to go to lunch, and I was like, I want to start a team. What do I do? And you're like, we'll start here. And a couple of years later, I have a team. But one of the things you mentioned, driving around, the hustle, it's funny. This happened to me literally yesterday. We just listed an industrial building for sale, and we went there to pick up keys, and there was a guy driving an older Ford F-250, and he was changing out stained ceiling tiles. And I didn't know who he was because I hadn't met him in person yet. And he's the owner. They have hundreds of employees, and the owner's physically there changing out the ceiling tiles. He's like, somebody told me it was going to take a week to do it. So you hit the nail on the head with that. The people who start these companies like to help pass it forward, and they work hard and they appreciate the hustle. And the funny thing about that is we went out there and met there and started talking to him. And next thing I know, he owns 6 other buildings in town, and he asked us to come by his big one because he's thinking of selling it in a year or two. So one deal will lead to another. So getting out in the field is super important. I would have never had that experience if I was just in my office making phone calls, watching YouTube videos of aerial drone footage.
And if I could interject on that,
Please.
There's 2 ways to handle that situation, and I've seen it countless times both ways. There's people in my business who would walk right by that guy, not say hello, not even give him a visual acknowledgement, and look for the, quote, heavy hitter in the building. I want to talk to the decision maker. Or you can go in and seeing someone doing manual labor, acknowledge them, say hello, how's your day? And the guy says, oh, I'm doing good. I own the building. And you're like, are you kidding me? Yeah. 2 ways to handle that situation. Obviously, you handled it the right way, and that's going to lead to probably a pretty big deal.
Yeah, he was standing on one of those folding chairs, cutting out ceiling tiles using a pocket knife. Ironically, the knife he was using is the company that he owns. So, but you actually just said something. I was gonna mention something, and I totally drew a blank. But client relations. Is there something Oh, I know what I was gonna say. Driving around, when you see people do, I call it the Uncle Jimbo effect. Sometimes when you're driving around looking at these industrial buildings and you see some guy out front smoking a cigarette, he might be the handyman or just the person taking care of the building. That person will have more information about what's going on with that business or that building because they're the one fixing everything. They're talking to everyone. So the decision maker is going to be nice to that guy or person. So even the handyman or the guy fixing the machine is a wealth of knowledge. So be nice to everybody because you never know what kind of information they're going to give you, which will lead to a deal. In the recession on Industrial Road, there was a building that got broken into. It was a foreclosure. And I met the handyman that was hired to board it up. And he's the one who gave me the contact information to the banker who was in charge of selling it because I couldn't get a hold of him. And I ended up listing the building and selling it just because that handyman, I was nice to him and asked him who hired him to do the job. And next thing you know, I had a listing that we sold. What about managing? This is a big one, but managing clients and client expectations. Do you have a certain system, or is it different with each client? Because I know you deal with one-off owners and also institutional clients, just based on the size of your team and the company you're with. Colliers, you guys do a lot of corporate business. Do you have different methods of kind of communicating with different clients, or is it just case by case?
So we have a pretty set program for what used to be the prospect call. You'd get on a phone call, you'd send over a Word or Excel doc with all the prospects, and you'd go line by line talking about who looked at the building, who made an offer, where a certain negotiation is at, and then you might talk about some general things and end the call. Now we start with an entire market update, going through new deliveries, identifying or adding or subtracting buildings from a competitive set, so the landlord knows or the seller knows exactly who he's competing with. So we go through a really good education process, takes about 25 minutes, then we talk about the prospects. So what used to be a really simple, here's who looked at the building call, is now a much more elaborate sharing of information. And it's not just us educating them, because they have different data points and contacts and conversations throughout their 2 weeks, because that's how often we do it. So they're educating us on what they know, and that helps us make better decisions on a given deal. But we still have clients who just want to get on the phone once a month and say hi and ask who looked at the building. So it's really up to the client. But if the client doesn't have a preference, we're going to go with the slightly more elaborate way, give them the market update, education process, sharing of information, and then talk about the prospects.
It's kind of case by case basis. It's interesting how some clients, they don't want to hear from you unless there's good news. Then there's ones that want to know everything that's going on. So there's some that are a little more hand-holding or involved. So it's interesting that you do that. How do you actually share the information? Do you guys jump on Zoom calls or email them reports or have some sort of specific system you use for updates?
We usually send over the information a day in advance so they can hopefully digest it and the conversation can have more content. And then we get on Zoom or Teams, or sometimes if they're traveling, just a phone call. So again, that's kind of client driven unless they're neutral, and then we make the decision to do, because the face-to-face is just, it's not going away anymore after COVID. When we all started to get on the Zooms and Teams calls, that's not going away. Most clients in Vegas are out of town, so it's not realistic to think you can sit in front of them more than once or twice a year. So I think those are the platforms that are here to stay. But you brought up a good point. The toughest thing, the most uncomfortable thing that I've seen a broker do is call the client and say, hey, I wanted to say hi, I'm still here, and nothing has happened on your property in the last 2 weeks. That's a very difficult conversation to have. So what do most brokers do? They don't make the call. So what does the client thinks? He thinks you're in Tahiti, doing nothing. There's all these leads coming in and no one's responding to them. So what I try to tell newer people in the business, residential and commercial, is you got to pick up the phone on a regular basis. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, I have no new activity. Steve Jones, who looked at the building 3 weeks ago, isn't even returning my calls anymore. And the client's like, I get it. And it's uncomfortable. But after a few calls, the client understands that you're going to call him whether it's good or bad news, whether there's a new deal on the table or there's nothing. And that means he knows you're always engaged.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. I used to be terrified when I had a listing, and if it was an owner who was taking a chance on me because I was new and I didn't have any activity, I would almost ignore them, and it just pissed them off. So over-communicating is better than nothing. Even driving by and sending them a picture of their building to know that you were physically there for a tour or something is good advice. But yeah, no news is still news. So be in constant communication with your client. It goes a long way. I really like to keep my clients up to date on what I'm doing, just even via text message. I'll send them a text and say, I toured this construction company. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but they know you're being engaged and you're doing something with their property. That's a really, really good piece of advice. Do you have some sort of, this is a question I wanted to ask you. When I first got into this business, was firing a client was really hard, where you were new, you were having a tough time maybe paying your bills, you were just trying to get any kind of business. And you later in your career, you realize, this person might not be a good fit for me. Maybe the vibe's different, or you're just not the right person for the assignment. Do you have any advice or any example stories of where you had a client that was successful and you were successful at that point, but the fit was just not there, and how you approached parting ways amicably? Yeah.
So that all kind of stems from a conversation I had with a guy named Doug Roberts probably 25 years ago, when he explained to me the Panton no jerk policy. And it was always the company's goal to not work with people that they didn't enjoy working with. And we all know that can't happen all the time, because I'm sure if Panton had a 1 million square foot build-a-suit and the guy was a jerk, they'd probably still do the 1 million square foot build-a-suit. But I've always tried to live by that as much as possible. And after 34 years, I'm still not completely successful, because there's clients who we might not thoroughly enjoy, but we still work with because it's profitable, or maybe it's mutually beneficial in some other way. But for the most part, if it's not an enjoyable, mutually beneficial process, we end it. And we used to represent a pretty big landlord, over 2 million feet of their product. And whoever happened to be running the show at the time just wasn't enjoyable to deal with. He was always sending us on wild goose chases. he was always creating new reports for us to do. So when that starts happening on a regular basis, and I don't think the reports we're doing make sense, they're not necessary, I will put what I call Mickey Mouse language in those reports. So one of the prospects might be Mickey Mouse, and Mickey Mouse brought Lucy from Peanuts to the building, and they decided that they can't run their pumpkin patch there this year. And I'm talking about old cartoon shows that might not be relevant to young people. And you get on the prospect call and you go through some stuff, and the guy's like, great prospect report. Thanks for the new report. Let's move on. And you know he's not reading it because you put Mickey Mouse language in there, and he didn't even say what the heck is going on with this. So that's kind of a test we do to see if somebody's making us do meaningless reporting, and that might be a relationship that we're going to end.
It's interesting. So they're sending you on a wild goose chase with unnecessary information. For context, you mentioned Doug Roberts with Panton. Panton is a monster development company, and Doug Roberts is a very seasoned developer who's been successful at it and doing it a long time. So coming from him, that has a little more weight. So anyone watching or listening, that's a good name to listen to. So yeah, that's getting rid of a client can be tough, especially when you're newer to the business. But I kind of have the feeling that life's too short, and if someone's making your life miserable, even if you're making money with them, sometimes it's just better to part ways and move on, because if they're messing with your I call it like your energy, or you're not able to be at your best because you're in a bad mood all the time, sometimes it's better just to cut ties with them and move on, because you don't know what better fit is going down the road. So we talked about staying engaged. You're out and about client relations. You've got a big team. I know you're very involved with SIOR and NAOP and Colliers, your company. You're very involved with. That kind of goes back to your reputation. You've got a pretty dominant reputation in town. You guys are one of the biggest teams in the state, if not the biggest. You guys do several $100 million, and I mentioned that $1 billion year the other day. Is there some sort of tip or something you do in your own practice as far as keeping your reputation as good as it can be, a professional, and not being being perceived in a negative way?
I mean, to me, it's really how you treat people. And going back to the guy replacing the ceiling tiles, that guy's doing a meaningful task. So I try to think about it like that guy's no less important than the building owner. So the way I started my career, and I really don't remember if this was taught to me or I came up with it on my own, but I do a bottom-up approach to client relationships. So when you call a client for the first time, who answers the phone?
Receptionist.
So that was the first person I always tried to befriend. Whatever it took to get in good graces with the receptionist is what I would do. Next up might be some lower mid-level operations person. I'd try to befriend them, and I'd work my way up the flagpole until eventually I would talk to the decision maker or the owner, and he might have multiple good reports on what a nice person I am. And he seems knowledgeable, but he's a really nice guy. And that guy's much more inclined to give me 5 minutes. And that's where I can kind of unleash my value proposition of what I think I can do for that company. A lot of people I've seen start at the top, and sometimes you can be really successful, maybe lucky in doing that, and land a big deal. I've just always tried to work my relationships from the bottom up. Same thing in my office. I try to keep great relationships with all the people who keep our operation going and make sure they're happy and fulfilled. Aaron West, our manager, does a phenomenal job, but I try to help out in that as well. So to me, it's just about being a good person, and the old rule, treating people the way you would like to be treated, is the way I think I've developed whatever reputation I have right now.
That's interesting. So I've related to that. When I first got into this business, I loved networking. I would go to as many events as I could. I'd meet the big developers, the big brokers, owners, and they wouldn't hire me. I'm like, they're nice to me and they like me, but why won't they hire me? And it took me, I don't know, probably 8-9 years to learn there's a difference of somebody liking you and somebody respecting your professional ability to get something done. And I realized that these people, I had great relationships with them. I'd see them on a personal level, maybe something social, and then they'd hire somebody who's a complete and total jerk, in my opinion, but they obviously had respect for them, and those people would get deals done. Do you have any advice for people who are playing this like everyone likes me, but I'm not getting hired situation, but the not so friendly person is getting hired, as far as like walking that fine line of being liked and also being respected, and kind of maybe respecting your own time with some of these potential clients?
So the being liked and being respected is great, but you have to have the product knowledge to back that up. And that's probably why they're hiring that person, because when they call them and the guy says, I want to sell my 100,000 square foot building, they can rattle off the top of your head 7 buildings in town that could be potentially sold, what the pricing is and why. And that guy's like, oh my gosh, this guy really knows the market. I'm going to hire him. I don't know if I like him, but I'm going to hire him. So the product knowledge, back to kind of my number one bottom line for sales ability, is product knowledge, knowing the market. And you can't know everything. So when you're new in the business, don't just focus on a product type, whether it be land, multifamily, industrial, office, investments. Try to focus on a product type, but also try to focus on a niche within that product type. Like, I don't know if you're still doing it, but when we had lunch some time ago, you said, I'm trying to focus on 5 million or less investment deals, plus, of course, landlord and tenant rep. Those are 3 pretty good niches that eliminate over 50% of the industrial brokers in Vegas. A lot of guys are focusing on the big sales, 25 million plus. A lot of guys are focusing on big tenants, 100,000 square foot plus. Not only are those deals less frequent, but a lot of times the fees get cut in those bigger deals. So you could make more selling a 25,000 square foot building than I might make selling a 250,000 square foot building, because those fees get shrunk down so much on those big transactions. So don't just focus on a product type, which most people do not, unlike you and I, but focus on a niche within that product type so that you can quickly develop enough knowledge that when you have that conversation, you're the knowledgeable guy, not just the nice guy, and the guy's more likely to hire you.
So I love the fact that you're reiterating this, and we've talked about this a little bit. Market knowledge, market knowledge, market knowledge. Do everything you can to learn your market and what's going on. Drive the market, read publications. I mean, NAIOP, SIOR, the Las Vegas Review Journal, they all put out information, and those are all nuggets of information that can help you win a deal. Like you said, sometimes the jerk gets hired because they know more about what's going on. And I always use the analogy with a doctor. If I don't like a doctor, but they're the best at what they do, and I needed them for whatever ailment you might have, I'm still going to go hire that person because they're the best at what they do. So I do have a question for you. When you said being new to the business, you and I both kind of fell into this business. I would have never thought that I was going to be a commercial broker for as long as I have, even industrial, like broker's assistant. I was a broker's assistant. The guy was a industrial broker. If you were right now, day one, coming out of college and wanted to get into this business, what's a couple pieces of advice you could give a new agent coming in?
So it kind of goes back to the information that you can get from the internet, from the publications, from the professional organizations we talked about. You might gather a dozen pieces of really good information over the course of 1 week. But if you don't have anybody to bounce that off of, chances are most of it will be wasted. You have to have someone to talk to about that information that can take that and say, well, that means this, or that means you should call this. So my point with that is it's probably best to hook up with someone who needs a junior person to do the legwork, or what I call the minimum wage stuff.
Yeah.
And that's how you learn the business. With me, I'm really old school. So I think someone in the business needs to learn the administrative role, because you have to learn how to mail documents. You have to learn how to write a letter. You have to learn how to correspond appropriately and professionally. Then you have to learn the marketing. Then you have to learn the property tours, how to show a building. You don't just show up, start reading off the brochure, and the client asks how many docs, and you look to the back of the building and count them. You should have done all of that before the client or the broker with their tenant gets there, so that you kind of have your spiel. So whenever I still go out with people to show buildings like Morgan, and I'll say, okay, we're 20 minutes early. You're probably wondering why. Show me this space. And if he misses one or two things, I'm going to remind him, you got to know the dot count. You got to know the clear height. You got to know the ceiling insulation. It's a lot of the stuff that you point out on your little informational Instagram videos. There's people watching that I know for a fact that say, this guy knows his business, I'm going to call him. Maybe he just moved to town and wants to buy a 50,000 square foot building. I think your social media is better than anybody in industrial real estate in Vegas.
Appreciate that.
And that's probably one of the reasons when you said, can you help me? I want to start a new team. I was like, of course I will, because you're doing amazing stuff and I really want to see you succeed. So unfortunately, people like me don't have time to do that. So I'm trying to develop that with other people on my team. But the social media thing, especially the educational process, is really going to continue to produce leads.
Yeah, it's. I was surprised. I got a sale listing off my Twitter account, and I don't even go really too much into it. I just examples of something that happened in the day. I just tweet like, "Oh, I had a tour, and this guy asked me this question. Here's the question and the answer," and it's just sharing information. So, kind of reiterating what you were saying was, if you're new to this business and you want to get in, find a mentor or a team to get on, and do everything they tell you to. I totally agree with this because I had to do it. When I was new to the business, I had to do the marketing brochures. I did them on PowerPoint because I didn't know how to do them. I was delivering keys. I was doing letter of intents, doing photos. I literally would go take pictures. I went and bought an SLR camera to take pictures and upload them, because once you know all the ins and outs of the marketing and all the ins and outs in the marketing, and you're putting the letter of intents together and you're doing the marketing, then you're ready to go talk to clients. And like you said, you went and toured with Morgan. You need those answers, because if you answer one of those questions wrong, that might be the deal breaker for that client. So that's good advice. So if you're new to this business or want to get into, hook up with a mentor or find a team, even if it's not as an agent, be a marketing assistant or just any kind of admin work to get your your foot in the door. Yeah, Camila Rosales, who is on my team, she's from a property management background, and her ability to communicate with tenants when we're doing tenant interviews or estoppel certificates is amazing because of that property management background. She just has a ton of experience from that. But I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
So even if you don't have a mentor or a team to get on, do what you've done and reach out to other kind of mid-level and senior brokers and develop relationships with them. What I see far too often is maybe not a junior guy, but more of a mid-level guy come up with a huge lead or a huge deal. And there's basically two, left turn, right turn.
Okay.
Left turn is, I want all of it, and I'm going to work this deal as hard as I can. You might not have the ability to close that deal, and you're going to end up with 100% of nothing. I see that happen time and time again. Sometimes I hear about while it's happening. Sometimes I hear about it after it happens. Or you can say, I believe 50% of something's better than all of nothing. I'm going to go find a team to help me close this big transaction, not just put a big check in my pocket, but really put points on the board on building my resume. I just sold that 100 acres in the southeast part of Vegas to this developer. This team helped me, but I came up with the lead. That next guy you're talking to says, wow, that's phenomenal. I want you to handle this property. So it doesn't have to be your team. It can be any team. If it's mutually beneficial for you to provide them information that leads to a deal, they provide the expertise, and there's a fair fee sharing agreement, that makes all the sense in the world. You might have them call you back 4 months later and say, I got this big multi-tenant project. I don't have the staff right now to show 5,000 square foot units. Do you want to work on this with me? We have a Colliers guy in the Inland Empire who does most of his listings with a Lean Associates broker. I called him one day. Guy's name is Mark Zorn. I called him one day and said, why do you list stuff with this guy? He's like, we're buddies. We work the same territory, and we kind of got sick of bumping heads on assignments, so we work deals together sometimes. That is such a genius plan, and the client is really the biggest winner because he gets the resources of two companies for the same fee, and these guys, I guarantee, make more deals even though they're probably splitting it 50-50. Absolutely smart way to go.
You said a couple things that I wish would be said more in this business, which is something, a referral, 20% of a deal that gets closed is much better than 100% of something. Not only are you most likely not to get the deal done if you're outside your expertise, you're also doing a disservice to the client, which I think is wrong. I don't do any residential real estate. I refer all of that out, and I've got some pretty good referral fees from that. I got a referral fee on a $2.5 million Blue Heron home, and it was literally me just saying, hey, call this agent. They know that product type, and they walked it through. They closed the deal, and I got a referral fee on a $2.5 million deal. So that is really good advice, is partnering up with people who specialize in that. Even in your own specialty, there's in my office, there's a guy, his name's Eric Larkin, is a good broker. He deals with a lot more corporate stuff than I do. About once a year, we'll partner up on a deal because that's what that team specializes in, and that's not really my cup of tea. And the deals usually get done, and I'm getting half of something versus me potentially screwing it up because it's outside of my expertise. And like you said, when we met a couple of years ago, my business plan is not to deal with the corporate business as much as more the individual owner or the owner who even might have a couple hundred employees, but they're running more. Or they're in there running the business day to day, because I connect with those operators a lot better than I do some big, asset manager in New York. And I've been able to leverage that, and our team really specializes in that. We're doing deals with it. I mean, we've had our best couple of years the last few years, which is great because we picked a practice and stuck with it.
And you're also dealing in a business that is less susceptible to national and international events. So the rise in interest rates affected my business way more than yours. You talked about the $1 billion year. That was 2022, and we made more giant project sales than I've ever done in my career. We still did a lot of landlord business, a lot of tenant business, sold land, got development deals going. But where the real money comes on a giant year is when you're selling big projects, like $100 million deals plus, multiple of them. When interest rates go from 3 to 6.5%, that business usually goes to zero until buyers and sellers figure out a new firm ground and how to operate in this new interest rate environment. That type of event is much less likely to affect the mom and pop on a day-to-day basis. So you're having your best years, and I'm down probably 35% because we're not having those big sales. So it isn't just that it's less competitive, it's less volatile in my opinion, and it's a phenomenal business plan.
It's one we've stuck to, and I like the clients really more than anything. I just wanted to get back to one thing on the referral basis and partnering up with people. That is something that I can't reiterate enough. So having you say it, I love the fact that you're saying the same message, which is, if you get a real estate broker and on the back of their card, they says that they specialize in industrial and condo and luxury and, they're a notary and all of the above, run away from those people because they probably suck at everything they do. Probably a little more blunt than I need to be, but I really appreciate specialization and referring out to people who are experts in their practice.
And just for clarity, it certainly doesn't have to be a 20% referral fee. I think what you did on that Blue Herring home was 100% appropriate. But if somebody brings me a project or a big idea, they could be in for half. I've had situations where I'm like, look, I'll go to the pitch and I'll help you out and I'll take the 20% referral. So it doesn't have to be a 20% referral. It can be anything that both parties deem to be appropriate. But the point is you're getting the deal done and you're doing what's best for the client.
Yeah, doing what's best for the client is the most important part. But yeah, you're right. The referral fee or partner fee is 20% is a number that gets thrown around a lot. But when you're partnering with somebody or referring something out, depending on the workload, it's totally negotiable. You can pick whatever's fair. So that is a conversation that is important to have with another broker openly. And if they're not willing to have that, that's probably not the best partner to work with on that project. So we're here in Las Vegas, which is the entertainment capital of the world. I've been here since 2005. I went to UNLV. The city has grown leaps and bounds even since I've been here. We've just had Formula One, the Super Bowl. They opened the Sphere, which is that giant eyeball TV arena that I still don't quite have a tough time processing when I see it lit up. Where do you see Las Vegas going over the next 3 to 10 years, and how do you feel we're going to be evolving more? Because the reason I ask this is even since I've been here in the business, gaming has been the number one driver of the economy. Obviously, we have the Las Vegas Strip, so it's noticeable. There's thousands of employees on the Strip, but I feel like Las Vegas has kind of grown up and matured, and we've attracted industries that we might have not gotten 10 years ago, more tech-based companies, assembly, specialty manufacturing. Where do you see Vegas growing from today in 2024 and the 3, 5, and 10-year span?
So you kind of answered the question yourself,
No.
which is what I call the insulation effect of Vegas. For 35 years, we've talked about diversifying our economy. And it's really tough to take the gaming capital of the world and say we're going to make a major shift in how we do things and how we bring people to town. The tourism, the gaming, and the convention, I don't think is ever going to go away from Vegas. If anything, it's been enhanced by everything you just mentioned, whether it be coming to Vegas, hitting a Raiders game, and then going to your convention the next day, or hosting a corporate event here because you might want to see the Las Vegas A's play baseball in 3 years.
That's
when
so
hopefully
exciting.
that stadium opens. So we're just continuing to add new significant things for people to do in Vegas. F1 was a great example. There was a book written a long time ago about the millionaire effect, and it's when you do something to a city that starts to bring a lot of millionaires there on a repeating basis. It can change the platform of the city. You can have people come to that city and buy a vacation property because they realize they like it. You can have a satellite operation there. You can have a headquarters there. Unfortunately, the million is not the mega effect that it used to be. So now it's called, I use the same analogy, but it's called the billionaire effect. And no event in the history of Vegas has brought more billionaires to Vegas than F1. And that is a minimum 3-year contract. So I'm hoping they renew it after that, and those people continue to come to town and see everything they offer and do one of those things at a minimum that I just mentioned, because it can absolutely change the trajectory of growth for Vegas, not just in population, but in demographics, wages, types of employment we have, and getting back to that goal of diversity so we're less susceptible when a COVID hits and people stop coming to a certain city for a period of time.
Yeah, COVID was wild in Las Vegas. To see the Las Vegas Strip shut down, that is not something I want to see again.
Well, and one of the most interesting things with that, to completely go off topic, is most people never think, I did not, that no casino has ever been built to close.
Oh.
So the MGM, for example, Mirage, they don't have locks on the doors.
Interesting.
Other than the metal fire escapes. So the main entrance to the Mirage, somebody figured out shortly into COVID, we have to lock this front door that has no locks because it's
That's
never
interesting.
been closed. And we had to put these giant chains around all these doors to lock the casinos for the first time in the history of Vegas for almost every property.
That's interesting. So that makes sense though, because the Strip's open 24/7. Why would you put locks on the doors?
I think someone told me there's a couple properties like in East Henderson that have closed, family-owned operations, small casinos, but for the most part, they never have closed, and we had to figure out how to lock them and protect them. And when you saw those YouTube videos of people riding bikes the wrong way up the Strip with no automobiles, I mean, it was just bizarre. Now, to finish that story, as most people know, we went into a really scary time, which for me, I thought was going to be another GFC, which is the end of 2008 when the world economy collapsed. What happened is industrial just absolutely exploded.
Yes, it did.
And people say, well, why did it explode? Well, imagine going to a Smith's Food King and seeing no toilet paper, let alone all of the consumables that disappeared from the shelves when people started stocking up. Then you had the supply chain issues where you couldn't get product in, and groups like Kroger decided we can't ever let that happen again. They moved to Vegas shortly after COVID and moved into a 482,000 square foot building in West Henderson because they couldn't do just-in-time delivery on their inventory. They had to have product here in a warehouse to ship to stores immediately. They're now, today, moving out of that 482,000 square foot building into a 1 million square foot building in Apex. So groups, that's helped Vegas as well, where a lot of groups realize Toronto Bakery is another example where they used to ship bread into Vegas on a daily basis to all the casinos and restaurants. You'd pop it in the oven for 2 minutes and bring it to the table hot because it was par-baked in Chicago. Toronto decided we can't afford those shipping costs anymore, and we need to have a plan here. And I think that pattern is going to continue to repeat itself back to the diversification of Las Vegas.
You said something that is, well, thank you for answering that, because I agree. Vegas is just, I think we're in a very good spot, and I think we're going to continue to grow in a positive way. But you said something about COVID, which seems like forever ago, but there was about a 6-week to 2-month period where I thought it was 2008 again. The world's going to end. We're not going to do any deals. And all of a sudden the phone just started ringing and ringing and ringing. And then we became a necessary job. There was a certain classification for it.
Essential employment.
Thank you. Essential employment. Next thing I know, I'm touring buildings for people making soap, and their metal shops adapted because they had to start making things domestically, or even just in Las Vegas, versus getting things in from Mexico or California. And it just totally changed the industrial market. And another thing I saw was people who might have been in small retail shops selling jewelry or clothes. They realized, I can sell all my stuff online versus having a storefront. So if they had a small 2,000-foot retail shop that they're paying $3 a foot for, they went and got a 2,000-foot industrial space for $1.50 a square foot. So same space, half the price, and they changed their business model to Etsy and Instagram. So that was a really interesting time. So bullish on Las Vegas. It sounds like you think we're going to keep growing and be in a good spot. The market has changed quite a bit. You mentioned Apex, which is a monster industrial development in beyond North Las Vegas that has millions of square feet being developed. How do you see that filling up over the next 3 years?
So I think we have 12.5 million square feet under construction in Apex. That's an area of town that has been trading land sites since before I got in the business.
Speculating. You buy it for 40 cents, sell it for 80 cents. He sells it for $2. He sells it for $4. The market goes down. You're back to $1.50. The problem with Apex was no one was willing to spend the money to put infrastructure in until a guy named Wes Adams got with the city of North Las Vegas and said, I'll do the work, I'll spend the money if you guys help me with entitlements and subsidize in bringing water and sewer to a lot of those development sites. That just happened to be coincidentally at a time when the Speedway had almost absorbed all of their vacant buildable land. And buildable is a very important term in Vegas, because when I used to have clients fly in and they'd look at all the vacant land, they're like, this market is not land constrained, as you said. Why would I build this building when anybody else can go buy one of these vacant sites? And then you have to tell them that a lot of land isn't serviced by utilities. We have big time civil issues in Vegas with 100 and 500-year floodplains. And 84% of all the vacant land in the state of Nevada is owned by the federal government or the state of Nevada and can't be purchased unless they choose to bring it to auction. Apex is providing an outlet right now for large users. Kroger's a great example of that. There's a number of big companies who are going out there to open up their own facilities because the land was cheap, and more importantly, they can buy 20, 50, 100 acre sites to put their buildings on. Then the spec developers quickly followed. The latest purchase up there, I believe, is the second largest land acquisition that Prologis has ever done. They're the largest owner of warehouses in the world, and they just bought 870 acres in North Apex to work on a long-term project where they're going to do some really innovative, creative things in addition to supplying over 11 million square feet of warehouses. So that kind of answers the question. Prologis, which is the biggest industrial landlord in the world, bought 870 acres in Apex, and they're slowly developing it. So that kind of answers the question. Prologis is a very meticulous company. They put a lot of homework into things before they pull the trigger. I was just in Cannes, France at the MIPIM Commercial Real Estate Conference, and they had a monster presence there. So when you talk about Prologis, they literally are everywhere. So no, I appreciate the input on Apex, because that's another one of those projects you hear it a lot, but unless you're up there doing deals, it's hard to know what's going on. So I think brokers and developers are really the only ones that really have a pulse on it. I want to shift gears a little bit to personal side. I asked this question for this example. I feel real estate agents are often really poor with their personal money management. When I use this as an example, when I was 21, I was in this business briefly. I did a couple deals. I thought I was going to be a hot shot. I was just, wrapping up college. 21 years old, I bought a house. I bought a Ducati motorcycle. I went and got an Audi, all financed. And then in 2008 was the great financial recession. I realized people were leasing shorter. Instead of doing a 5-year lease, they're doing a 1-year lease. And I quickly realized, oh my God, I have these things I financed, car, motorcycle, and house, and I'm not really making any money. It was a rude awakening. I was really happy. I was in my early 20s when that happened. From there, I kind of spawned into this realization that having debt on dumb things like a car and a motorcycle are big no-nos. And two things I realized is you could be making money one day and the next day you don't have any. And when you realize, because we're commission only and having payments can be scary. And the other thing that for me is a personal issue, if I have big payments on some of these things, I can't work on the deals I want to work on. So by trying to be minimal overhead and debt-free, it allows me to work on deals that can be bigger because I don't have to worry about the smaller pay your bills deals. So I'm a firm believer in trying to keep your overhead as low as possible. There's other brokers I've talked to that love to go lease the latest Range Rover and their payment's $2,000 a month. So there's different philosophies on this. So I'm personally keep your overhead low and work on the deals you want to work on. Do you have any advice or how do you approach this kind of situation if you're talking to a new agent or even the guys on your team?
Yeah, and it's not just new agents, but it's how I talk to myself. So I have a 30-year client named Julie Dillon, lives in San Diego, bought and sold countless properties for her here. 27 years ago, I was selling her a 40,000-foot building. She had an exchange, and the 40,000-square-foot building came available next door. And I said, Julie, these were cheap prices, this point in time. This building just came available. Why don't you buy them both? She said, well, I only have the money for one. And I said, well, that's easy because I'm the genius. We go find a lender. We put a 50% loan on both buildings, and you can buy two instead of one. She said, well, I don't do the D word. And just like I'm doing now, I scratched my head. What's the D word? She said, debt. I don't do debt. And I never forgot that. And I have lived the last 25 years without debt of any kind. So I don't finance anything. And there's a lot of stuff I go without. Never had a Ferrari. Maybe I can afford it, maybe not, but I don't need it. And I sure as heck wouldn't put a loan on it. So that's something that, fortunately for you, you were able to survive the GFC in 2008 with that debt. A lot of my friends to this day had to get out of the business and go find a salary job to make those payments. The house had to go back to the lender. The car had to go back to the dealership. The other stuff, just to keep food on the table, they had to get out of the business, and they missed the next run-up and the next run-up and the next run-up, and they're still working in a salary job, doing fine, just not the stuff like you're doing. So you always have to live below your means, and I really try. When you're starting out in the business, you have to have some levels of debt.
Sure, of course.
It's no longer acceptable to drive around a 1972 Honda Civic like I did when I started in the business, with the seat falling off on the guy's sport coat when he got in the car. And then he probably got home and said, I'm never going in that guy's car again. That's really tough to do nowadays. So you have to have somewhat of a car that works well, and you have to have a place to live, whether it's renting or buying. But over time, you want to try to eliminate debt, in my opinion, as quick as possible. Now, some people think if I could have got a 3% loan 2 years ago, that's free money. To me, that's not free money. That's 3%. And I just don't want that overhead. I'd rather sleep better at night. So as you just described, living below your means is probably one of the most important things you can do in this business. Unfortunately, the guys like you said who make a quick pop, because I believe this is a get-rich-slow business, it's very tough to make consistent good money.
Absolutely.
And it takes a lot of time. And you just have to be willing to do without. The guys who make the quick pops early sometimes go out and buy all those shiny new pennies you just described, and the first downturn comes, they either have to give them all back or give them all back, and worse yet, get out of the business to get a salary job somewhere.
Yeah, every that's very good advice. Yeah, everybody, I get asked that question. A lot of brokers drive these sexy cars, and my answer is always, what's being sexy is not being broke. I get a kick out of it. You'll see sometimes brokers, like you said, they get a pop, and immediately within a couple of weeks, you see them driving a car that costs six figures. But
well, and think about the guy changing ceiling tiles to be completely redundant. That guy owns multiple industrial buildings, and he might drive a 7-year-old F-150 pickup, and you pull up in a Porsche. To me, that's not an appropriate interaction, and it never has been. I drive an F-150 pickup. It's a nice F-150, but that's what I drive. That's my everyday driver. I don't want to be in that situation where I pull up in a Porsche or a Ferrari or a Range Rover, and the owner of the business, who probably makes 10 times what I make, is driving a 10-year-old pickup. It's just not an interaction that I enjoy, and so I don't do it.
I'm not going to mention his name or his company, but I have a client in town I've represented for a long time. He drives an early 2000 Lexus that makes really funny noises, and he owns other amazing cars, but it's the funniest thing in the world. I've sold him multiple buildings that he's paid cash for, rented spaces, and he'll show up in this car that is squeaking, and he finds it funny because people think he's broke, and he shows up and he walks it, and he'll typically do a deal when he says he'll do it, and he is completely under the radar. And he has cars that you could show up in, and you'd be like, oh my God, that car is on the cover of Motor Trend. But he just doesn't care. He's just like, he gets a kick out of it at this point. Like I think it's like his ultimate flex. But no, those are the really, really good topics we've covered today. So any other, just to wrap up here, do you have any other, anything that popped in your head over what we've talked about? We've covered Las Vegas. We've covered the economy, development. Any other final thoughts on the industrial brokerage industry here in Las Vegas?
So I think commercial real estate as a whole is suffering with a significant age problem. So you're 39?
38.
38.
Clinging on to my 30s.
And I consider you to be one of the young people in the business. 38 is not that young. The average age, SIOR is a great example. I think the average age of an SIOR across the globe is 57 years old. There's not near enough young people getting in the business for a variety of reasons, most of which is just education. So I think it's all incumbent upon us to educate people in middle school and high school to at least give this a look. If you're going to go to college or not, because you certainly don't have to go to college to go in commercial real estate. This business needs a lot of young people coming into it to stay alive and to be able to service our clients in 10, 20, 30 years. I'm not going to be doing this in 20 years. That's just a fact. My team won't be doing this in 30 years. So we need young people getting in the business. The same thing is with females. If you go to an SIOR and NAB convention, I think someone told me it's 98% male, 2% female. That's a huge problem. Just like you mentioned with Carmela coming from property management. Property management and title are the two most educated resources for hiring into brokerage because their skill sets are beyond most, other than maybe a CPA, which I think is the best education you can get for commercial real estate. But females, especially young people, we need in this business, and I go out of my way to educate any young person I can about this business, the benefits, but also the downside, and why I think it makes a phenomenal career path.
You are 100% right. I think there's a huge opportunity for women to get into this business and also have a client type that the currently dominated brokers in our industry might not relate with as well, because as you mentioned earlier, this is relationship based, and however you have the relationship with your client, whether you're friends or whatever, there's a big opportunity for women in this industry, and I'd love to see more the numbers kind of even out a little bit. That's interesting. You mentioned SIOR, which I was so reluctant to join some of these organizations. There's ones like CCIM and NAOP, and SIOR I find to be one of the best ones. I just was reluctant to say, like, why would I go hang out with a bunch of people that do exactly what I do? But proximity is a big deal. And once I started to go to these events, we've talked about education a lot. It's people, experts in their field, constantly talking about the market best practices, and you learn a lot from it. So I've gotten a lot out of these organizations that I've joined. And SIOR, I've been in pretty recently, and I mentioned I was reluctant to join, and it's been a great thing. So that is a tip for new agents or just any agent. Get around producers in these organizations. Try all of them and find the one that fits best. And before we started, you told me I should join some committees, which I haven't really looked at, which is something I'm going to look into, which getting involved in these organizations, just not being part of them. Well, Dan, I appreciate you coming in and talking to me. That went by way faster than I thought. As always, I appreciate any advice or life experience you give me in the brokerage world, because you've been doing this a long time and been successful at it. I have one final question for you, and this is that personal finance thing. Do you think that part of your success has been that you have kept your personal finances pretty low, or your overhead pretty low, to be able to work on projects that you really wanted to work on, or maybe the big ones, versus having to chase smaller deals to like pay your Range Rover payment, which you said you don't have? But
Yeah, you have to be able to develop wealth at some point, because this business, unfortunately, doesn't offer a retirement program.
no.
So when you stop producing deals, your income stops that day. So you can either save a bunch of cash, you can invest in certain vehicles. I buy buildings, sometimes land, and I really try to do the type of properties that aren't going to compete with my clients. I've owned bigger buildings that compete with my clients, and the level of disclosure you have to continually make is exhausting. Thankfully, I don't own any more of those. So I own smaller buildings that I can manage myself or have someone help me with. Doesn't ever compete with my clients, and it provides passive income, because passive income is something this business does not generate on its own unless you go out and do it.
Yeah, that's a topic we didn't cover, but we could get into this for an hour. But I'm surprised how many brokers don't invest in real estate. But you're right, you have to be really careful about investing in things that don't compete with your clients' buildings, because you can't be leasing a building that you own and then the competing building you have listed for lease. That's a big conflict of interest. So that is a careful one. But I'm a big believer in investing in real estate. Passive income's a big deal. I like anything that mailbox money. I like anything that sends you a rent check every month, or in that concept. So Dan, I really appreciate you coming in. We could keep this going for hours. It's just a wealth of knowledge talking about Las Vegas trends, which is another topic we didn't hit. But again, I appreciate the time. This was a great interview, and I hope we get to do it again soon sometime.
My pleasure. Look forward to it.